Here with an episode of Chordplay, and this is the Chords of Incubus. And of course, we're going to be talking about Mike Einziger. And Incubus was formed in California in 1991, and they kind of hit the scene, you know, with the album Fungus Among Us. I think that was in '95. They followed that with the album Science, which is a great album, kind of a cult favorite, I guess, or a fan favorite. And then, of course, in '99, they released Make Yourself, and in 2001, they released Morning View, and they literally just exploded. And there was a time, you know, on the music scene where they were on MTV, they were in magazines, they were on the radio, they were literally everywhere, and extremely popular too. But I know when I first heard the band, the first thing that caught my attention were Mike's chords. You know, I could tell. I was like, hey, this guy's playing changes. You know, he's not just playing power chords or whatever. It's like, no, he's actually playing, you know, really lush and intricate chords. And you know, I've definitely been a fan. As soon as I noticed, you know, what he was doing on guitar, I started to really listen and pay attention. Next thing I knew, I was a fan. And I got to see him on the Morning View tour. It was phenomenal. It was one of the best shows I've ever seen. I don't remember the band that opened for him. I wasn't really familiar with their music, and whoever it was just kind of disappeared, I believe. But Incubus itself, when they came out, they sounded great. They had a great light show, stage show. And they sounded exactly like their albums, which I'm really impressed whenever I hear a band live and they pull off their sound, you know, where it's like, wow, blown away. With the opening, that was the song Just a Phase, which is from Morning View, and that's one of my favorite Incubus songs. And part of my attraction to that song are the chords. You know, I think Mike definitely tapped into some really cool, you know, tonalities and this kind of flavor for this song. So it opens with these partial chords and this kind of melodic, ringing, you know, melodic figure that's based around, you know, little partial chords, like part of an A, there's a higher, you know, piece of A, a little piece of G, you know, like little fragments of chords, little dyads and double stops. But then you're hitting all these open strings and kind of creating this melodic line like this. So let me go through that a little bit slower. So that in itself is really interesting to kind of tap into that little, you know, melodic ringing intro part. Right here, this is really interesting. This kind of showcases Mike's chord vocabulary. So there's a B minor add 11, and it's going to feel a little bit like an add 9 or a sus2, you know, shape, but your pinky is actually going to be over on the G string and not on the D string there. So then you're fretting, you know, the low E, the A, and the G, and then you're playing the open D, open B, and occasionally you kind of hear that high E string ring in there too. You know, really cool chord. It's like, yeah, I love chords like that. So you'll hear the melodic line. And he's really just kind of strum, you know, kind of almost brushing through the strings, you know, as he strums it. Strum really loud or really aggressively. Just kind of brush your pick through the strings. And then after he establishes that part, he actually changes from that B minor add 11 to this. And a really clever E7 is really what that is. And you'll see we're holding the 11th fret there on the A and the 9th fret on the G, and then everything else is an open string. And that's technically an E7 chord, just played in a very, untraditional way. But I really like that, it's kind of sneaky, where it's like, oh, that's a cool, cool voicing. Next up is the song Consequence, which is for Make Yourself, and this has some really interesting chords hiding in it too. And it looks and sounds like this. See right there, we're starting with this, which this is yet another interesting E7. So when we started with Just a Phase, Mike tapped into that E7. And here's another crafty way of playing E7. And you can see we've got the low E, the 11th fret on the A, and the 13th fret on the G. And then we're also playing the open D and open B in there. So a very kind of striking and eerie E7 voicing. But I like that. Once again, it's unusual, it's different, it's not the same old chord, it's something a little new or different. And then he takes that shape and literally relocates to where your middle finger's on the 7th fret. And if you put it right there, that's a B sharp 9. And then you'll hear just for a second it goes down a half step, and that's a B flat flat 9. So right there, just taking that same shape and just kind of moving along the fretboard, you can uncover all these interesting, chord voicings. And then the second time through, he starts at the same. Eventually you're going to move that down, and that's really just a G major, but played in a very unique way, which I like that too. That's a really cool way to change up a boring old G major chord. Play it like that. Next up, we've got the song Stellar, which is from Make Yourself. And I know the first time I heard this guitar part, I could hear, parts of the chords he was playing were moving, and he's kind of doing these slight bends, almost a half step. And it gives it this really exotic flavor and sound, something like this. There you can see we're kind of just grabbing this double stop on the 9th fret on the D and the G. And when you play that with the open A string, that's going to basically function as an A sus2. And then you hear him move that up a whole step. And then he's basically, kind of targeting that. That's an A6. And then when he does that kind of slight bend, and he's really just pushing, the strings down toward the floor, you kind of hear that, and it's almost implying an A7 sus4. If you were sliding it with your finger like that, you can kind of hear what the bend is kind of mimicking. And then he moves down to the 6th fret, and that's going to function, with the open A string as an A major 7. But then he bends the 6th fret double stop on the D and the G, where it's kind of almost hitting, a half step, and that would imply an A sus4. If you bend that. So that's really cool. And then right there, he's just kind of, picking through. It's kind of like a C sharp power chord, and like a little piece of like a D flat 5 to a D5. But you put that together and you've got Stellar. Really cool. Next we've got the song Mexico, which this is from Morning View, and I know the first time I ever heard this song, I grabbed my guitar and tried to figure out what he was doing, because I thought, wow, I like those chords. And it has this kind of ringing, suspenseful sound. And he's also kind of doing hybrid picking, where he's picking the bass notes of the chords with a pick, and then he's using his middle and third finger to kind of pluck the higher strings, like this. Cool, and that's an E5 technically right there, because we're fretting an E and a B, and then we're also playing the open B and high E string together. So it's just two sets of the same notes, you know, an octave apart, something like that. And then that's going to move down to where you're playing a C power chord, but you're still using the B and the high E open, and that's going to function as a C major 7. And then you'll see he moves right here. And that's basically B flat major. And then he moves all the way down there, and with the fretted notes and the open strings. And right there he's grabbing the G and the high E, so he's missing that B string. So that's where it's handy if you kind of hybrid pick this. So that progression. Second time through, he actually changes this to E minor, so he's going to add that G note right there and do the C major 7 the same. You know, really cool guitar part, and I like those eerie chords like that. It sounds really cool. Next up, we've got the song Nowhere Fast, which is from Make Yourself, and this is in drop D, and actually everything that we're going to look at until the end of the lesson here is going to be in drop D. So this, the next example, and the last example are all in drop D. Everything else was in standard. But in Nowhere Fast, it's really cool the way it opens, because he's really just holding one fretted note and playing a series of open strings, and he's double picking, and then he kind of does a couple one-fingered power chords there on the bottom, like this. There, that's basically a D add 11 if we add that fourth fret on the D string and then play the open G, open A, and open low E. So a D add 11, really dreary and kind of dreamy sounding chord. And then right there you're just going to play an F power chord and then move up to a B flat 5. Just repeat that pattern of notes. Up next is the song I Miss You, which is also from Make Yourself, and we're still in drop D. And it's this interesting kind of open string ringing chord part. And then he actually adds a harmonic mixed with chords at the end, something like this. Guitarists, you know, add harmonics to chords, or they kind of, you know, combine single notes and harmonics together. And this is a really, you know, kind of interesting guitar part. So in the beginning, we're playing the low E and the D open and grabbing that C sharp there on the fourth fret on the A string. So that's going to function as a D major 7 implied for that first part. And then add the fifth fret on the low E string, which we're in drop D tuning, so that's technically a G. And if we play that with the open D, and we're also going to grab this harmonic on the 7th fret on the G string, which that's a D, you know, as far as the pitch of the harmonic. But if we play that, then basically playing a G sharp 11 right there, implied, which is really cool. Really cool guitar part, and I like the way the chords and the notes of those chords are just ringing into each other, and it's kind of blurry, and it creates this really interesting sound. The last example comes from the song Aqueous Transmission, which is from Morning View. It's the last song on the album. And I do remember reading, like in a guitar magazine, it was Mike, being interviewed, and they were kind of, promoting the album or whatever. And he mentioned that he met with Steve Vai when they were putting that album together and working in the studio. And he went over to Steve Vai's house and was kind of hanging out. And I guess while he was there, he noticed this really interesting instrument. And he asked Steve, I was like, what's that? And it was a pipa, which is basically a 4-string Chinese lute. And it's a very ancient, instrument, very unusual and kind of exotic. And if you don't know what a pipa looks like, here's an image that I kind of created to kind of help you get an idea of what this was actually performed on. So the guitar part we're going to look at actually wasn't performed on a guitar, but we can kind of emulate the sound of the pipa. Now, as far as emulating the sound of the pipa and kind of playing with Aqueous Transmission, what we're going to do is we're going to pick really close to the bridge on the guitar. And I thought about changing to an acoustic guitar, but I'm just going to stay on electric for this. And keep in mind, it would sound even closer on an acoustic guitar. But we're going to pick very close to the bridge, and we're going to emulate the sound that you hear on this recording. And it also kind of sounds like a koto, a Japanese, famous Japanese stringed instrument. And I recently did a lesson for Guitar Player magazine, Koto-graphic, which was in the December 2019 issue. And that was basically a lesson dealing with mimicking the sound of the koto, which is kind of the Japanese version of a pipa. But Aqueous Transmission looks and sounds like this on guitar. And you can see right there, it's really cool. And it opens with this, which, in drop D tuning, that's basically a D6. And it's interesting the way he's kind of hitting the open strings and allows them to ring, and then he spells this out. And then he kind of continues letting the low strings ring while he's grabbing that F sharp right there. And then right there's kind of a quick little bend, kind of a half step from B to C, and then end on that A. And it's kind of a rake. Kind of raking through those strings. And then there's part of an E sus4, and then a little piece of B7 right there. So a really interesting guitar part, even though it's not actually played on a guitar, but you can emulate the sound. It's going to wrap this look at the Chords of Incubus, and I'm definitely a fan. As soon as I heard their music and kind of caught wind of some of the, chord-based ideas that Mike was playing with, I was hooked. I was like, man, I like this band. It's melodic, it's rocking. The earlier stuff definitely had a really hard edge. Fungus Among Us and Science were almost kind of like funk metal or something, and then they slowly kind of evolved into the sound you hear on Make Yourself and Morning View. And of course they've continued, Crow Left of the Murder and Light Grenades, and they've had, many albums, 8, and some of these other albums they've released. But I mainly just stuck with the glory days, the early kind of material, the very popular, albums that they've released. And there's a lot you can learn from a player like this. It's obvious he kind of borrowed some of his ideas from prog rock, jazz, and classical. And I'm hearing little pieces of Alex Lifeson and Andy Summers and some players like that in Mike's playing style. So anyway, leave some feedback and some comments. Please subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.